This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Good morning. Ask me if I'm feeling any better. Well, the answer is no, in case you were curious. I don't know what's going on, man. I'm going through these weird hot flashes where I'm okay for a certain period of time throughout the day, but later at night, once I sit down for a bit and my nasal passages start to get all clogged up again, it's bad times. And I don't want to blow my nose because I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to start gushing blood all over God's green earth. I've tried a couple troubleshoot things to ease up the stuffiness. The Vaseline is at least keeping my lips from drying up. But see, that's the problem. Because I'm having so much trouble breathing through my nose, I have to start breathing through my mouth occasionally just to get the air flowing. Then it makes my tongue and my lips dry up. And I've drunk nothing but water and coffee for the last week and a half. Honestly, I don't know how much good the water's doing. I'm not on the brink of death or anything. I'm just kind of ready to go back to breathing normally. You know, it's made recording these shows extraordinarily difficult because I have to keep pausing to drink water in between. And evidently, the longer the show goes, the stuffier I get. But I'm going to try and push through and give you my best efforts on this Monday podcast. We've got retro WWF to cover. And in addition to Raw, we've also got the 1996 Royal Rumble pay-per-view to talk about. Before we dive into the pay-per-view coverage, make sure you comment, subscribe, like the show if you have not already. The FSWR podcast is here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new material. We are the wrestling channel that nobody knows but everybody needs. I know WWE had a Saturday night's main event special over the weekend. I contemplated for all of like 2 seconds about whether or not I wanted to watch that show. I could have. But then I was like, nah, I'm not really up for it. The card looks absolutely atrocious on paper. I don't need to see another Jey Uso single feature for a major world title. Now, that ship sailed after the Roman feud last year. I think Jay's been exposed in more ways than one as a singles guy. Once you get past all the yeet stuff and the flashy ring entrance, the guy's about as fun to watch as a rotting potato. His matches suck. So I'm keeping it simple this weekend. We're sticking to the classic WWF. And since I don't know how long I'm going to be able to hold up here, let's get into the pay-per-view recap and start dissecting the fun times ahead. And do you all remember the main thing that I said on last week's Go Home show when it came to the 96 Royal Rumble? The fact that I had very little memory of anything that happened on the pay-per-view outside Shawn winning the Rumble match. I think I now remember why that was the case. This show was wholly forgettable. So much so that after I finished watching it again, my first thought was, I'm pretty sure when I wake up sometime next week, I'll have completely forgotten about the show all over again. There were 3 things on this pay-per-view that stood out in terms of headlines. You had Shawn winning the Rumble match, whatever the hell that Goldust Razor IC title match was supposed to be, and Naked Sunny. And the problem with Naked Sunny is that she was only on camera for maybe 10 seconds. I'd have rather seen an hour of her caressing herself in a bubble bath than watching an hour of the most boring Rumble match in history. And not to immediately jump ahead in the review, but while it is on my mind, let me just say, that Rumble match sucked. The most nothing happening, starless, bland, vanilla, flavorless Rumble match probably in history. Now, I know there's like 35 documented Rumbles in WWE's archives. It's hard to narrow it down to distinguish which one was specifically the most boring. So far, the 96 one takes the cake for me. I can't tell you how many times I nearly fell asleep watching that slog fiesta. Maybe the redeeming news is that because the show was so boring, I won't have to spend 45 minutes talking about it. Because there's really not a whole lot to say. Now, before we get into the actual card, just in case you're somebody that likes to hear the stats when we go back and talk about these classic pay-per-views, I don't really bother covering the buy rates because I usually don't care about that kind of stuff. But for the people that like to hear attendance figures and the venues these shows are hosted from, this one took place from the Selland Arena in Fresno, California. They allegedly drew 9,600 people to the venue. Is that a true figure? You'll have to consult Dave Meltzer to corroborate that. It actually doesn't seem that unrealistic based on how terrible WWF business was around this time. Drawing less than 10,000 people to one of their big 4 WWF pay-per-views. God, think about how people would be shitting their pants hearing something like that with today's product. If WWE in 2025 was drawing less than 10,000 people to a major premium live special, at that point, you'd be suspecting they're about to sell the company and close the doors for good. Some people forget about it, though. Seriously, that is how painfully awful the product was in 1996. Overall business was in the doldrums. I think here it was mainly an extension from the record economic terrible year that was 95. Everything across the board was down, from ticket sales to live gate numbers. The product had never been any more ice cold. And the real issue here in 96 was that Nitro had just taken off the previous September for their pilot episode. So we had a lot of disgruntled WWF fans jumping ship to watch the competition and not giving Vince a second thought. Just driving away more and more viewers. And who could blame them? I've said already, Nitro wasn't exactly setting the world on fire from right out of the gate. You still had the Dungeon of Doom, babyface Hulk Hogan around there. People were very resentful of that. But you still had variety with the kinds of newer talent being featured at the time. You still had the WCW originals that had name value. There was a freshness to what they were doing compared to the same old boring song and dance that the WWF had been doing for the previous decade. The only thing WCW needed was a story that people could sink their teeth into. And by midway through this year, once they got Hall and Nash under contract and subsequently turned Hogan heel, the rest is history. They just left WWF in the dust. So anyway, let's move on to the card. Speaking of leaving people in the dust, that is exactly what they did with this Jeff Jarrett Ahmed Johnson opener. I can only imagine being a fly on the wall when a guy like Jeff Jarrett is sitting in the locker room trying to prepare for a match like this. He's like, well, this Ahmed Johnson guy kind of sucks. He's clunky. He's awkward. He's kind of reckless and dangerous to work with. How exactly do I idiot-proof this match to avoid him hurting himself, or even worse, hurting me? God, how does Jarrett even react when he hears the news that he has to work with that walking meathead in the first place? Literally having just returned to the company at the tail end of last year, Vince goes up to him one day and says, "Pal, you're working with Ahmed." Double J's probably like, fuck. Should have just kept me off TV longer. What a rib. Ahmed is so bad, dude. He's so bad. I can't believe how much I forgot how horrible he was. He is honestly a textbook case study for why pushing big jacked up dudes is not always the best company formula. You can have all the muscles in the world, look like a chiseled out Greek god. When you watch an Ahmed Johnson match in real time, it's almost spellbinding. Like, if you're not sitting there asking, what the hell is he doing? The other time you're asking yourself, how the hell has he not either killed himself or the guy he's working with? Just a walking bull in a china shop. I honestly don't even know how to begin breaking this down. I strongly considered rewatching it just to make sure I had really witnessed everything I watched the first time. Between Ahmed's wacky-looking offense where everything looks so stiff and herky-jerky all the time, or anytime he has to register anything, he barely ever sells. There was a point in this match where Jarrett kept trying to give double axe handles off each corner of the ring. It was supposed to be one of those deals where Ahmed would hulk up and not sell anything to start his comeback. His hulking up consisted of him awkwardly jogging in place with a facial expression that either read, "I've got hemorrhoids," or "I'm trying to squeeze out a 2-day turd." No idea what the fuck he was trying to do. Then a minute later, he gave Jarrett a suicide toe payout to the floor and fell right on his fucking head. I have to imagine that had the guy not been so jacked up as he was, could have easily cracked vertebrae and probably died. And then we get the biggest middle finger finish in the world. After these two had a rotten match where Jarrett literally couldn't save it if he tried, he gave Ahmed a guitar shot from the top rope, which Ahmed no-sold, by the way. And as Jarrett gets disqualified and tries to head to the back, you see Ahmed remove the guitar scraps from his head and then immediately run to the back like he was the fucking Terminator. How many times has this P-Braid exposed the business just within the last month? With his unprofessional bullshit attitude. Constantly no-selling shit, making everything look fake as fuck. My God. Ahmed is the worst. He is the absolute dirt worst. And now I understand why nobody's ever had a good thing to say about him. There's zero redeeming quality about him. Oh, by the way, that crowd reaction after the match got thrown out, that was not a good heat finish. That was a boo, fuck this company heat finish. And I'd have pissed and moaned about it too. Had I bought a ticket to see it live, a bad pay-per-view opener followed with a bad finish, they earned that reaction. So then they followed that with a Diesel interview that I mainly tuned out. Talked about the Rumble for a little bit and said he didn't care who won the WWF title match because neither Taker nor Bret are on his level. Translation: I'm totally not going to get involved in that title match later on and screw over both guys. God, that was so telegraphed you could cut through it like fog. From there, we went into this completely thrown together WWF tag title match with the Smoking Guns and the Body Donnas. As I said on the Go Home review the other week, I have no idea how or when the Body Donnas became #1 contenders for the tag belts. Frankly, I don't remember the last time I saw Skip and Zip wrestle a match on TV, period. It also occurred to me here as I was watching him, not really having a whole lot of exposure to bleach blonde Tom Pritchard, that look did not suit him. He looked so goofy. Which, yes, I get was the whole point. I mean, why in the world would you want to have two legitimately talented athletes be normal, serious pro wrestlers? Vince's logic was to immediately make them both comedy characters. And not just comedy characters, interchangeable comedy characters. To the point where he actively confused himself throughout the match over which one was Skip and which one was Zip. Because, you know, Chris Candido and Dr. Tom looked exactly alike. You know what the sad thing is? Even when you look past the absurdity of the Body Donnas gimmick, this actually wasn't a bad match. For a title program with no heat and no reason to care about it taking place, I actually thought the work here was fine. And I am by no means a Smoking Guns fan. But they worked it kind of like a classic old school territory style tag match. You had the baby faces dominating early on and making the smaller heels bump around and feed. Then you had the spot where Sunny took the bump off the apron when Billy Gunn collided in with her. Of course, she goes down and feigns an injury long enough for the heels to jump Billy on the floor. Then she bounces back up and goes back to playing cheerleader again. Some fun double team spots with Tom and Chris. Granted, the whole thing did basically descend into a who the fuck is the legal guy impasse. By the end, I still wasn't entirely sure. But you had the heels get a visual pin on the champs after Sunny had taken the ref. Chris came off the top with an elbow drop onto one of the Guns, but he still kicked out before 3. And then they did a big schmoz with everybody. Heels tried to double suplex Bart, but then Billy ran into Spear Tom so Bart could stack up Chris in a small package and get the pin. Yeah, it got a little messy. It was by no means a tag team spectacle, but it was a serviceable pay-per-view match that didn't insult everybody's intelligence. You know, I understand for a lot of people, it's hard to objectively talk about Sunny, Tammy Sitch, whatever you want to call her. Her, her wrestling legacy is kind of tarnished after everything that happened with that auto wreck incident a few years ago that killed that poor guy. I've always been one of those people that say, you can't just entirely whitewash somebody's career and pretend it never existed just because of some horrible shit they did in their past. I mean, you could still ridicule them and believe they're rotten scum. Chris Benoit is a cold-blooded murderer and should probably rot in hell for the rest of his life after what he did to Nancy and Daniel. Doesn't mean that you can just erase him from wrestling history and pretend that his career never happened. No. That would be dishonest. I mean, you can hate him as a person and hate what he did, but you can't pretend the guy never existed. That's dumb logic. Not to say that Tammy's in the same boat as a guy like Benoit, but it is kind of the same principle. She did kill somebody, even if it wasn't done deliberately. She's in prison now. By the time she gets out, she'll be, closing in on 70? By that point, she'll look even more physically broken down and disheveled than she does now. Does that mean that I can't say anything nice about her wrestling career? No, I don't think so. People might not want to hear it because they find it offensive, but fuck people's feelings. I could still hate what Sunny did, but also at the same time acknowledge that she was a very gifted wrestling personality. She could talk. She could work. She was a natural on camera. I mean, I never enjoyed her WWF work like I did when I watched the tapes of her in Smoky Mountain Wrestling when she was just breaking in. But she was just as important to this match as the work the boys were doing. I mean, the Body Donna's gimmick always sucked. That goes without saying. But she did the best with what she was given to work with. So I have to credit her there. If she could have been more self-contained and not been a raging whore with all the boys, she may have worked out better for the company long term. But then again, when you're a young, fertile female with bulbous breasts and you get nothing but undivided attention from a bunch of mouth-breathing, horny men, self-containment isn't exactly what most women strive for in that sense. So then we had the match. The match that I had no memory of being for the Intercontinental title until basically the final 5 minutes of the Raw go-home show. Goldust versus Razor Ramon. But what was the real prize Goldust was seeking? Was it Razor's title strap or his other title strap, if you know what I'm saying? I also just remembered that this is the first official appearance we had from Terry Runnels, his Goldust manager. Of course, she went by Marlena here. She had worked for WCW as a makeup artist during the later stages of Crockett in '88, right as they were transitioning over into the Turner buyout. So she was already behind the scenes for several years. And I think she also did some brief work for WCW as an on-screen manager, right? Wasn't she like a fake accountant or something? I know it didn't last long. That was during a real downtime in WCW. I try not to reflect back on that era too much. So Marlena was basically Goldust's ringside director. She would sit out on the floor in her director's chair with a cigar. Never really showed a whole lot of emotion, but Goldust would occasionally look to her for approval on something. I mean, she served as a great distraction tactic for me during various points in the match. It was easier to watch her than it was watching Goldust cop a feel on Razor every 2 minutes. Or caressing his man tits in a very suggestive manner. You know what the fucking irony is about this whole match? I mean, this just goes to show how screwed up culture is in 2025. The idea of this match is that you have a flagrantly homoerotic guy dressed in very effeminate attire, actively trying to creep out this very macho masculine man's man. In the scope of everything they've done throughout this entire feud, their goal was to get you as a fan to believe that the effeminate, quote-unquote, gay worker was the heel and the masculine straight worker was the baby face. This would totally be a different situation in 2025. You could not do a storyline like this in wrestling now and not expect the gay guy to be over as the baby face. People would be laughing their asses off at the sight of watching the straight guy get played by the gay guy, regardless of how weird or creepy it comes off. But it's just so funny going back and listening to the fans here, because in California, of all fucking places, they were not into Goldust behaviors here. That whole opening sequence where Goldust is rubbing himself all over Razor, blowing kisses at him, doing everything to try to get inside his head, using Marlena as a shield on the floor while he's licking his lips. The longer that shit went on, the more tiresome and the more impatient this crowd got. They were like, enough of this bullshit sports entertainment crap. We just want to see wrestling moves. So, of course, what happens? Well, Razor starts fighting back on Goldust and the crowd starts popping for everything Razor does. They're like, yes, finally. Enough of this weird porno-like gesticulating from this goofball in gold makeup. I don't even know if it's the fact that the crowd hated the idea of Goldust being gay. They just hated it here because, the shit went on for like 5 minutes. And look, you can say what you want about it. I've said, I don't know how many countless times, I've been a fan of Dustin Rhodes for years. Sometimes he rubs me the wrong way with his blatant pro-AEW desperation tweets, telling people to stop criticizing the product and just love everything they do. Like, that kind of stuff just makes me want to kick him in the groin. But the guy's obviously a very talented worker. He always has been. I never liked the Goldust gimmick. I thought it was hokey and over the top for the sake of being over the top. It's been modified and toned down throughout various stages of his WWE career. But when you think about the Goldust gimmick, this is usually the kind of stuff you immediately think of. Him doing this weird, perverted, man-on-man groping shit with a guy who clearly didn't want anything to do with it. And while I can't say the match was bad, it's just the big thing that stood out to me through the whole deal. The fact that Razor clearly did not want to be involved in this match. The fact that people were cheering and supporting the super masculine guy pummeling the fuck out of the more effeminate guy. It is hard to watch and not be uncomfortable seeing it. Nowadays, we associate that kind of stuff with hate crimes. Keep in mind, yes, I'm not an idiot. I know the whole thing is a work. I know that Dustin wasn't really gay, but contextually, this is just so bizarre going back and watching with modern eyes. Like, I vividly remember my parents being concerned about me watching Goldust segments when I was growing up. I was like, 9 years old when I was seeing it for the first time. This was some of the early provocative shit that was going on where my mom and dad were constantly monitoring what I was watching to make sure nothing devious was going on. They never outright told me to shut the show off, but there were points where they were like, what are you watching and what is going on with this guy? Of course, you can imagine a 9-year-old me trying to explain who Goldust was to my parents who weren't smart to the business. That went over about as well as you would expect. I don't remember their reactions when it came to the pay-per-view because, my brothers were also watching this stuff with me around the time. It's probably why I had a safeguard, because my half-brothers were old enough to understand, so they probably talked to my mom and dad and explained what was really going on. In any case, they do the match. It is with Marlena faking an ankle injury so that the 1-2-3 kid could run out and lay out Razor with a spin heel kick. And then Goldust rolled over on Razor and pinned him to win the belt. And the lasting memory of the segment was Razor laying on the mat, looking up at the ceiling, probably wondering to himself, how soon can I get out of this fucking contract so I can leave for WCW? Because this shit sucks. So then we arrive at the Rumble match itself. That is something I didn't directly mention from the beginning, but yes, the 1996 Rumble match did not main event the pay-per-view. And you know what? Considering how lame the match was, that was probably for the better. I already mentioned the lack of star power when it came to this 96 Rumble match. I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I tell you that. Outside the Diesels, the Vaders, and the Shawn Michaels of the world, I would say a good 90% of the 30 participants in this match were your average Joe bad WWF gimmicks from around this time. I know in the past I've tried to talk extensively about all the entry numbers. I don't even know if it's worth doing here. The entire story of the 1996 Rumble was, we're just buying our time waiting for Shawn to come out, because at this point we're just delaying the inevitable. Nobody else in the match mattered. Everybody else was just a body, waiting to be tossed out. And it's not even like there were any notable spots or angles worth mentioning in the meantime. Maybe outside Vader coming in and wrecking shop. I'd argue Vader had the best showing out of anybody in this match. Getting to toss out like 3 or 4 dudes. They definitely gave him the star treatment here. Actually, looking back, there was a spot in this match that made me howl with laughter. It made the whole experience worthwhile. It happened in about 4 seconds, but it was the goddamn funniest thing in the world. There was a moment here where Vader is seen walking around toward the opposite end of the ring, and you see Bob Holly kind of start to meander toward him. Holly tries to give Vader a quick little jab to the gut. Not only does Vader completely no-sell it, he slowly turns to look at Holly with the most irritated look on his face. Keep in mind, Vader wore a mask, and you could even tell this guy was pissed off. He was not having it. So yeah, Vader just kept walking. And then Holly shrugs it off and just goes to start working on another guy. I died. I should have fucking clipped it. But it was so worth watching the match again just for that one spot. All these years later, spark plug Bob Holly, still the biggest geek on the entire roster. Now, there was Jake Roberts' return, which was maybe eventful for all of 8 seconds. He showed up with a 10-foot python, scared everybody out of the ring, put the python on Lawler, and then it just crawled back into the bag. snake performed its spot, picked up its paycheck, and headed out for the evening. As did Roberts during his WWF run in '96. Although you do have to credit Jake Roberts for one thing. He was basically responsible for helping to get over Austin's 316 catchphrase at the King of the Ring. For anybody confused, we're obviously going to talk extensively about Jake's run here around this time. When he came back in '96, he essentially returned as a born-again Christian. He'd been battling with the alcohol addiction. I think most people know a little bit about that. So this is him trying to be an extension of what was going on in his real life. They tried to market him as a sympathetic babyface, which I don't really think was the Jake Roberts people wanted to see. I mean, it could have worked to a degree had he already not been physically broken down and barely able to move by this point. I think once the people realized what his physical conditioning was like, the nostalgia of seeing him back quickly wore off. Going back to the Vader conversation briefly, the big angle that happens in this match is after Shawn gets in there and eliminates Vader, he's seen going off the hinges as he gets back in the ring to dump out a bunch of other people. Now, of course, none of those actually count as real eliminations, since Vader was already eliminated himself. So, yes, it does completely defy all the logic of them doing that spot a million other times over the years. But in all those other cases, they actually do count as elimination spots. Seriously, how many times have we seen somebody get thrown over the top rope in a battle royal, but then the same guy comes back in and starts tossing other people out, but they still count as real eliminations? Not in this case. Vader tossed out Triple H, Bob Holly, Owen Hart, and Shawn Michaels. They all got to stay in the match. Referees just said, no, you guys are good. This big lunkhead's eliminated anyway. 1996 logic. So, fast forwarding through about 15 minutes of more mediocre entries and uneventful material, while me also simultaneously battling migraines. After they had disposed of all the ring clutter, we narrow the field down to the final four of Davey Boy, Diesel, and Shawn. And, well, you know how traditionally WWE's done the whole milking job when it comes to the final four or final three guys in a big battle royal? They actually try to make that spot seem really significant. Well, in 1996, they narrowed it down to those four guys, and approximately 30 seconds later, they dumped Davey Boy, and Diesel, and Shawn won the match. It happened about as quickly as I just rattled off all those names. Shawn eliminated Bulldog, Diesel eliminated Shawn eliminated Diesel. Just bam, 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 rapid fire succession. Which I was more than okay with, because, God, by the time we got to this point, I was over the match. To the shock of absolutely nobody, Shawn wins the Rumble match for a second year straight. And Diesel gave him the stamp of approval afterwards with the big high five deal. Obviously, doing an homage to their former tag team. It's... I don't know, like... There's literally nothing to fucking say about it. I'm not even trying to purposefully downplay it. You know, it was one of those things that never really bothered me, even though I hated Shawn around this point growing up. I guess it was because of the blatant predictability. Like, it was so obvious. How could I really get mad over it? I know there's no other end result. So me getting upset about it wasn't really going to accomplish anything. But that's all I could think after Shawn won. It happened. I knew it was coming. It didn't faze me. And by this point, I already knew what the end goal was. So I think I was just naturally jaded. Get the belt on Shawn. Finish your bullshit, contrived boyhood, wet dream story, and just move the fuck on. That was me saying that at 9 years old. And here I sit in my mid-30s with the exact same thought. And then there was the main event. The WWF Championship Match between The Undertaker and Bret Hart. That, if there was any TV build for this, none of it happened on Raw. Since the point they announced this match at the tail end of last year, these two have not done one promo face-off. They have not had one TV angle to set it up, one segment or interview to interact together. It's like they've intentionally kept these two as far away from each other as humanly possible for reasons that I can't even really explain. It's a babyface title match, so if you're a fan watching in the venue, who the fuck are you going to cheer for? By the time you had the pre-match brawl with Taker and Diesel in the aisleway, you immediately knew where it was all going. I think I talked about it on the Go Home review. My memories of this particular Bret Taker match are very slim. I remember all the stuff that happened at the finish, but as far as the work goes here, they've had better matches over the years. We'll just leave it at that. By this point, I think the crowd was largely tired and bored. They were sporadically into Bret's offense here and there, but overall, it was a very lukewarm environment. I mean, you mainly had Taker working over Bret through large chunks of the match while Bret sold and fought from underneath. Then they turned it around later on when Bret had started going after Taker's knees, and he was working that over for a while. It was probably the most effective way to do babyface versus babyface without explicitly making one guy a hated foe through the entire match. Bret was clearly easier to sympathize for, but the crowd also had a natural respect for Taker, so they weren't going to boo him the entire time. Like I said, what they did here was fine. I think the crowd got a little restless watching Bret work over Taker's knee for an hour and a half, especially by this point in the pay-per-view when everybody just wanted to go home. It wasn't a bad match, though. But it was mainly all window dressing to set up everything that happened at the finish, which kind of left a sour taste on the entire segment, especially when you consider how long the match went. But you get Taker doing a lot of zombie sit-ups following a flurry of offense from Bret. There's a subtle little story angle they do here that actually ties into the following night's Raw, where we see Bret give Taker a diving fist drop off the middle rope, and then he comes up slightly favoring his right knee. It was weird, though, because it didn't directly impact anything that happened to him through the remainder of the match. So, kind of thinking that he may have really hurt himself on the landing there, which is not entirely improbable, coming down with all that weight on your knees like that. But we get the spot where Bret exposes the corner turnbuckle so he can rip off Taker's face mask and then run him into the corner a few times. This somehow did not lead directly to a disqualification despite Hebner seeing it in plain view. And fast forward a minute later, Taker gets Bret up for a tombstone, and as he goes down to pin Bret's shoulders, the crowd immediately cocks their heads to the aisleway because, Well, to the shock of literally nobody, guess who returns to spoil the fun? Yep. Diesel yanks Hebner out of the ring. It leads to the match being thrown out. Actually, Taker wins by DQ in the technical sense. But the title still stays with Bret, which naturally angered The Undertaker. And because WWF was really experimenting with the edgy content here in 96, just to stick it to the dead man and let him know that he did it on purpose, Diesel looks up at Taker, and he flips on the big bird. And the crowd all goes, gasp! He stuck his middle finger up. Well, that's not very Christian-like. So, it's funny because I actually don't think that's the first time we've seen somebody raise a middle finger on a WWF pay-per-view. Didn't that happen on a pay-per-view we reviewed sometime last year? Can't remember who or where it happened, though. In any case, obviously this is done to set up Taker and Diesel for their big feud in Mania. And since they had a little bit of airtime to kill, they went through a rapid-fire post-game interview session with a bunch of boys in the locker room. They had an interview with Gorilla Monsoon and Todd Pettingill where they started plugging the February in Your House card. We had Michael Hayes talking with Shawn Michaels about the big Mania match coming up. Then we had Gorilla and Todd back for an interview. Only this time he got interrupted by Taker, who vowed revenge on Diesel in Mania. Then Diesel was with Michael Hayes, trying to play off Taker's threats, and to be honest, I don't even know what he was talking about for half of it. All I remember is that he tried to steal Ric Flair's catchphrase about being the best thing going today, and it made Big Daddy Cool look about as uncool as one could possibly imagine. And then he kept rambling about other shit for a minute while they were trying to give him the ixnay off camera. Then Diesel basically told him all to fuck off. What a deviant rebel that Kevin Nash was in 1996, wasn't he? Don't want to piss that guy off. He's unhinged, brother. Just like all the Click guys were. Out of control, unhinged, unprofessional, lazy. Bad times. Anyway, I basically shut the show off right there. I could not handle another 5 minutes of random interviews. All I can say is, there is nothing on this pay-per-view really worth going out of your way to see. It is a show that, when you try and rank all the all-time great or the all-time worst Rumble pay-per-views, I don't even think this one would fall into either category. This one just sits on the bookshelf collecting dust with nobody ever giving it a second thought. Shawn won the Rumble for the second year straight. The only noteworthy thing to come out of it. So hopefully I just saved you 3 hours of your life. I mean, I can respect people that want to watch some of these shows along with me, especially if you're following along in the Retro Review series. Do yourself a favor and take my word for it. This one's not even worth going back to watch the highlights. So here we are, 24 hours removed from the 96 Rumble pay-per-view. It also hit me when I was editing last week's Raw. I never actually gave the numbers for the Raw or Nitro ratings. I claimed the go-home show before the Rumble was very boring by and large. And apparently most people agreed with me. Because Raw got their asses handed to them by Nitro the other week. Get a load of this. Nitro's January 15th episode did a 3.5 up against Raw's 2.4. Yow. That's bad. And without having looked up what the actual card was for Nitro, I can safely assume that apparently people were not all too interested in hearing Goldust talk about wanting to bang Razor Ramon on live television, and or hearing Vince make blatant homophobic remarks. So, if there was anything that turned people off from last week's show, I can only presume it was that crappy promo segment. You know, funny enough, they managed to turn it around and score the win over Nitro this week. So we'll consider last show an anomaly. Yeah, Raw beat Nitro again this week, doing a 2.9 up against Nitro's 2.7. Not a significant gap there, but they narrowly squeaked by. It's actually been the track record for a lot of Raw wins over Nitro. Even just going back to the first 2 weeks of the year, I mean, you look at January 1st, Raw did a 2.6 up against Nitro's 2.5. Then the next week, January 8th, Raw did a 3.0 up against Nitro's 2.8. Those are not very wide gaps. And as we'll start to see as we approach the month of May, by the time Scott Hall and Kevin Nash finally jump ship, not only do those numbers flip completely on its head in favor of WCW, but they're not even close. So after they did the 2-minute recap of the pay-per-view, they opened this week with a pretty monstrous segment. And I do mean that in the literal sense. It's Vader's Raw debut, being set up by Jim Cornette as he comes out here wearing a Dolly Parton necktie. Very odd choice of detail. His promo was also very odd. You know, he's out there talking about Whitewater, the budget deficit, international politics. It's a simple question about time. What time is it? Well, I think you all know the answer there. It's Vader time. Not entirely sure how we got on the topic of global political strife. But if there's one thing I do know about JC's political takes, it's probably the one thing we'll never see eye to eye on. In any case, he wrestled Savio Vega. I did want to briefly mention, too, you know, they're still running with these Sunny pre-tapes where she's being all provocative and, for lack of better terms, slutty. Not to say there's anything wrong with it. I did, however, pick up on the Rumble package where Vince mentioned the word titillating. And right as he said the word tit, who is the person they show on screen? Tammy Sitch. I think I see what they did there. So yeah, Vader and Savio. Yeah, Vader had a reasonably good showing in the Rumble match the previous night. But this is a true actual showcase match to really spotlight what he could do. And we've talked about it before. You know, back when they were airing the Vader promo vignettes. By the time he signed with the WWF in 96, we obviously weren't getting peak prime Vader. You know, he was already dealing with a pretty bad shoulder injury that required surgery, which explained why they shot the angle they did here in order to write him off of television so he could get that taken care of. I always seem to remember that Vader got hurt at some other point in his run. I didn't actually think the angle here was strictly done to write him off the show for the surgery. But it makes sense. And it was a very well done angle. You get the whole afterbirth where Vader's in there wrecking shop and beating up officials. Jim Cornette's trying to control him and get him to settle down. But Razor's just on a complete rampage, beating up anything that moves. Of course, putting his hands on the referees was bad enough. But when Gorilla Monsoon got in there and gave him a verbal tongue lashing, that's where things really got heated. And it starts with both guys jaw-jacking back and forth. And once Gorilla has the ring announcer make the announcement that Vader's indefinitely suspended, you can pretty much tell where that was headed. Actually, looking back, it was Monsoon that instigated the attack. Vader didn't even get physical with him until Monsoon turned around and shot him across the chest a few times. Then Vader was like, all right, enough of this bullshit. So he splashes Monsoon from behind in the corner, gives him the Vader bomb and lays him out. Eventually you had Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon running in for the cough save. About a day and a half too late. That's another one of those booking gaffes that you look at and you're like, how in the fuck did it take somebody that long to run out to try to help? That whole attack went on for like 5 minutes. Plenty of time for Shawn and Razor to get out there to try to lend a hand. Looking past that, again, it was well shot. Just kind of sucks that they had to write Vader off the show so soon. Granted, he wasn't gone that long. I think he ends up working the Mania card. But if I remember, he's involved in some kind of multi-man match with a bunch of other dudes. So he didn't really get a featured spot on that card that year. All in all, it was a good start to the program. Vader's run in WWF was always kind of a bittersweet thing just because of all the crap that goes down with Shawn. But if the goal is to make him look like an unstoppable beast, you can't get much better than what they did here. Guaranteed that Cornette had a hand in putting that segment together. I wouldn't doubt it for a second. I also love the picture-in-picture after break where you see Vader grabbing JC by the collar in the locker room, yelling for him to fix all this. You see this giant open cut on Vader's chest from where Monsoon had chopped him earlier. He was still bleeding during the tape here. Then we get this great line from Vader as he goes, "From now on, I am declaring war on you, Mr. McMahon. And you, Mr. Ah." Still not entirely sure who Mr. Ah was supposed to be. I would likely assume Gorilla. Meanwhile, as we watch Vader pummel the fuck out of a trash can, they're just playing Hunter Hearst Helmsley's calm, soothing Renaissance music as he's making his way to the ring for a match with Razor Ramon. It was a funny production thing. Giant Monster is throwing shit around in the back. Quick, cue up Hunter's British Renaissance music. He was also accompanied by model Shay Marks for this match. Camera guy was sure to get all the shots of her from ringside. I think he might have climbed up inside her skirt at one point for some of those camera angles. So they ring the bell to start the match, and approximately 5 seconds after the opening bell, they cut to a split-screen pre-tape with the 1-2-3 Kid and Ted DiBiase, where they're making fun of Razor Ramon for crying and whining after he lost to Goldust last night. And while they're making fun of him, you see the kid in DiBiase hold up a giant milk bottle and a very large, oversized baby diaper, which immediately got me remembering what they do for the Next in Your House in February. I never even necessarily had a problem with the whole baby bottle diaper story. I mean, that's a classic Memphis booking angle right there. I think it was more so just the reality that this fucking Razor versus Kid feud is still going on after, God, what, 8 months? Actually longer if you trace it back to 93 when the Kid debuted. Technically, Razor still never settled his issues with him. They've thrown a lot of obstacles in the way throughout the last couple years. But that was my main takeaway from that pre-tape. Razor versus the 1-2-3 Kid. The mid-card feud that never dies. And all the while you got Hunter still feuding with a fucking garbage driver, Duke Droese. Fresh off his hog pen showdown with a pig farmer. God. How in the hell did you look at Hunter's booking here in early 96 and think, that guy is destined to win King of the Ring this year? Now, I know it doesn't happen. Some other things come up in the meantime. But that was most definitely the initial plan. Meanwhile, you got Hunter working dead in the water programs with the lowest guys on the totem pole. So he and Razor had this match. It's relatively boring, mainly because Hunter was in control for a lot of it. And Hunter's matches are always boring. But we get to the spot where the Kid runs down with what is supposed to be a giant baby bottle. It resembled more like a regular-sized white water canister. But he pretends to wedge the top of the bottle into his mouth. Whatever that thing's called. And then they just call it the nipple, comically enough. And then as Razor goes to chase him around ringside, he ends up getting counted out. So, yeah, they're just knocking it out of the park with Razor's booking right now. After losing the IC title and getting molested by Goldust the previous night, 24 hours later, he gets a gimmicked baby bottle shoved down his gullet, and then he loses via countout to a guy that's currently feuding with a trash man. You ever get the impression that Razor's totally given up trying? Just a hunch. Speaking of things I've given up on, Billionaire Ted skits. It has been 3 weeks. I'm already officially over it. These now have more go-away heat with me than fucking Todd Pettingill skits. I will briefly mention what happened here, and then I'm just going to move on. Wrestling War Room segment. Ted Turner is sick of stealing WWF's creative ideas. He wants his committee to come up with original concepts for the talent. Naturally, none of them can think of anything because they're all lazy, incompetent morons. And then Scheme Gene comes up with an idea, but he tells everybody to call the 1-900 hotline number to get the details. Because, you know, he's Scheme Gene. So yeah, that was garbage. By the way, you know Russo was stirring with plenty of stupid ideas while this pre-tape was going on. This may have been where he came up with a Brawl for All concept. Or Kai and Ty chopping out Val Vetus' dick. Fun stuff to come over the next few years. God, if you think things are bad now, just wait. And then we had the Shawn Michaels interview. better known as the schlong sucking contest between VKM and HBK. Who could suck Shawn's dick harder and longer? It was a close race, I'll tell you. They both did an exorbitant amount of schlong sucking during this interview. I know I already did my Shawn Michaels spiel with the Rumble. I will digress again. Here's what I'll say about this promo, just to cut to the chase and talk about the important stuff. You know, Shawn's out there trying to sell WrestleMania as his big moment. His primary goal is to become world champion. But he's also got some unfinished issues to handle with the likes of Owen Hart. Guy's been going around bragging that he nearly put Shawn out of commission for good. Naturally, as HBK is making the challenge, out comes Jim Cornette on behalf of Owen. You're telling Shawn that he's the one that signs all of Owen's contracts. So if Shawn wants to pick a fight with Owen, he's got to go through JC to get the match signed. And this is one of those exchanges where you could tell there was a lot of personal dissension going on between these two, even during this period. The biggest problem was that once he and JC started going back and forth on the stick, you know, Shawn was really losing his train of thought and stumbling over himself constantly. It was a really bad showing for Shawn. He was trying to get his point across that he wants Owen, he'll do anything to get the match signed. So JC goes Shawn into putting up his title shot for Mania. You know, if he wants the match with Owen, he's got to put his money where his mouth is. So Shawn tries to play it up by getting the approval of his clique, which is supposed to be the crowd. It's funny because Shawn mentioned the clique like 4 times during this promo. Unless you were an insider at the time, you probably had no idea what the fuck Shawn was even talking about. And so Shawn accepts the challenge, promises that he's going to do to Owen what he's about to do to JC right now. And the payoff is him grabbing Corny by the collar and tossing him over the top rope to the floor. You can actually see on the way down Corny smacking his tailbone off the side of the ring apron. So that probably hurt like a motherfucker. I mean, I don't think Shawn intentionally tried to hurt him here, but it's hard to tell around this period, given the way Shawn acted. I was okay with Shawn putting up the title shot against Owen. It made sense given their history dating back to last fall. Normally, I would hate it when a babyface willingly puts something at stake when he doesn't have to. A lot of the time, they just look like idiots for doing it. But this at least made some kind of rational sense. And let's be honest, did anybody really expect Owen to beat Shawn at In Your House? Would have been nice to think. Owen versus Bret in the main event of WrestleMania 12 for the WWF title. That was more of a wet dream than anything else. But going back to the schlong thing real quick. God, watching Vince and Shawn here. You got Shawn's arm draped over Vince's shoulder as Vince is talking about what a great performance Shawn had at the Rumble the previous night. Tossing out Yokozuna and Vader. Outlasting 29 other guys. Even though he didn't. It's enough to make you want to vomit in your mouth. I even wrote here as a side joke. Can these two just get a room? It's a really bizarre infatuation that Vince McMahon had with Shawn around this period. Ever since the face turn, it's like Vince is constantly going out of his way to force and cram the pro-Shawn propaganda down people's throats. To the point where everybody eventually starts to resent it. But then again, it's not the first time and certainly not the last time we'd seen that when it comes to Vince pushing top guys. He did it for years with John Cena, Roman Reigns, Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior. I think it stands out a lot more with Shawn, just because you know for a fact that very few people were buying into it. It's more on par with the Roman Reigns booking we saw from the post-Shield stuff to right before Roman went on hiatus during the whole Scamdemic era. That's the equivalent to what was happening here with Shawn in '96 in the lead-up to Mania. An arbitrary forced babyface run that the majority of fans did not want to see. I think the only difference between Roman and Shawn was that Shawn was a supremely better in-ring talent than Roman was during the mid-2010s. So people were at least willing to look past a disreputable personality. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. Let's talk about the main event, because I'm absolutely losing it here. It's a champion versus champion match. Intercontinental Champion Goldust going up against WWF Champion Bret Hart. Again, Goldust being accompanied by Marlena at ringside. Doing the Lord's work by sitting there smoking a cigar. Interesting clash in styles, I guess you could say. Although Goldust didn't really seem to have much of a sexual interest in Bret like he did with Razor. So there was less caressing and kiss-blowing going on. Yeah, they were working the story from the Undertaker-Bret title match where Bret came up limp after giving Taker the double axe handle from the middle rope. So Goldust would occasionally try to target Bret's knee whenever he got the chance. I can't really say it was a bad match. It was just kind of there. Watching without commercial breaks didn't really affect my enjoyment because the match wasn't constantly getting broken up. But God, there were like 4 commercial spots during this match. And they were in like succession too. They would wrestle for a few minutes, then they would go to break, then they came back and wrestled for another few minutes before going to break again. God, if you were watching this on TV at the time, it must have been impossible to get into. It's made even better by the spot where Goldust tries to leave mid-match, but he gets stopped by Razor in the aisleway and gets thrown back into the ring. You would commonly presume this would be grounds for a disqualification due to outside interference. Apparently we're all fools, because the match just continues like nothing ever happened. Even though the official blatantly saw Razor attack Goldust from behind and throw him back into the ring. And so when we come back after the 17th commercial spot, Bret basically gets Goldust in the sharpshooter and immediately forces a tap out. So indeed, the brand new IC champion, 24 hours after winning the strap at the Royal Rumble, they beat him in the following night's TV main event. Clean. Now, yes, he lost to the WWF champion. It's not like he was doing a fucking job to Barry Horowitz. But remind me what this was supposed to accomplish? I don't know. And like I said, the match was kind of lousy when you factor in the random commercial breaks and the fact that they did virtually nothing of interest. But it set up Bret's post-match promo where he talked about the fallout to the finish in last night's main event. Basically promised that Undertaker would get his rematch because he deserves a real finish with a real closure. But right now, Bret's focus is on Diesel. They have a steel cage match booked for In Your House. And Bret is making a promise that he's going to settle the score once and for all. He's sick and tired of hearing Diesel bitch and moan about corporations changing his personality. The cage match is going to be the final chapter in their story. Pretty short and sweet. Nothing fancy. I do find it interesting that they got pretty much half the February In Your House card booked this far in advance. And that pay-per-view isn't until like what? Mid-February? But they've already got Owen and Shawn, stipulations and all. Brent Diesel in the cage for the belt. Triple H and Duke the Dumpster. I think Razor and the Kid is official too. That might actually be a full card. Maybe one other match that I'm forgetting about. All in all, I can't say the Fallout show to the Rumble was terrible, because that wouldn't be fair. It was just mostly a show that existed. I mean, it definitely peaked in the opening 12 minutes with the Vader angle. The Sean Cornette promo did what it needed to do to set up the stakes for In Your House. Bret's promo about the cage match with Diesel's fine. That's probably the best way I can sum up the night after the Royal Rumble. It was fine. Not everything is my cup of tea from a booking standpoint. But at least they're trying to keep things flowing and not fill the entire show with a bunch of meaningless filler crap. Although those billionaire Ted skits can fuck right off. But that's going to round it out for this one. I'm just completely and utterly stuffed right now. I am so sorry for anybody that has to listen to this show. I'm trying to get better with each passing day. There's just something going on right now, and I might need to go in to see somebody. But that's discussion for another time. I'm going to wrap it up there. This coming Friday, we'll have the standard territory coverage for everything. Next week will be the 2025 Royal Rumble plus Retro Raw. I think that's it. If anybody has suggestions or diagnosis as to what the hell's going on with me, please let me know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I'm just going to try to take it easy and not overwork myself. But until Friday, take care all. Peace out.